December 17, 1944, 0800 hours, Bulge, Belgium. The first German tanks are already inside the American position. There is no long artillery barrage, no warning, no time to organize a defense. The men of the U.S. 2nd Infantry Division suddenly face German armor pushing through the darkness of the Ardennes. But behind those tanks is something the Germans need more desperately than another victory: fuel. Joachim Peiper, commanding the armored spearhead of the 1st SS Panzer Division, is driving west toward the Meuse River, and his greatest enemy is not an American tank. It is the fuel gauge. Germany has launched its final great offensive in the west, gambling everything on a breakthrough through the Ardennes. The plan demands speed. Tanks must keep moving. Bridges must be captured intact. American defenses must collapse before Allied reinforcements can arrive. But Peiper's column has already been delayed. Then, at Bulge, his men discover something almost unbelievable: an American fuel dump containing approximately 50,000 gallons of gasoline. For the German spearhead, it is an unexpected lifeline. American prisoners are forced to help refuel the captured German vehicles while the armored column pauses inside the suddenly overrun town. For a few hours, it appears that Germany has been handed exactly what it needs. The tanks are refueled. The engines roar back to life. The column can continue west. But the fuel does not solve the real crisis. It only delays it. Peiper is racing across a battlefield where every mile consumes gasoline that Germany can barely replace. His tanks are moving toward the Meuse, but behind them the German supply system is struggling to keep up. The entire offensive depends on captured Allied fuel, captured roads, captured bridges, and captured time. And Peiper is about to discover just how fragile that gamble really is. The Americans have fuel. They have trucks. They have ammunition. More importantly, they are beginning to understand where the German spearhead is heading. Every mile Peiper advances takes him farther from his own supply lines and deeper into enemy territory. The captured American gasoline gives him mobility, but it also allows his column to push deeper into a battlefield that is rapidly closing around him. The question is no longer whether Peiper can capture enough fuel to continue. The question is whether 50,000 gallons can carry an entire German armored column far enough before the fuel runs out again. Because the German offensive does not have the luxury of stopping. If the tanks stop, the breakthrough stops. If the breakthrough stops, the entire plan begins to collapse. And somewhere beyond Bulge, American commanders are already buying the one thing Peiper cannot capture: time. By December 1944, Germany is fighting a war it can no longer sustain indefinitely. The Western Allies have enormous quantities of fuel, ammunition, trucks, aircraft, and replacement equipment flowing toward the front. Germany has something very different: a shrinking pool of trained soldiers, aging vehicles, limited reserves, and an increasingly desperate dependence on captured supplies. Hitler's answer is the Ardennes offensive, a final gamble to break through the American lines, cross the Meuse, and drive toward Antwerp. At the center of the northern attack is Kampfgruppe Peiper, commanded by Joachim Peiper. His orders are brutally simple: move west, move quickly, and do not stop. But the German timetable begins falling apart almost immediately. American resistance at Lanzerath Ridge delays the breakthrough. Roads become congested. Units lose contact with one another. Engineers struggle with obstacles and damaged bridges. By the early hours of December 17th, Peiper finally pushes forward through Hansfeld. But the delay has already created another crisis. His tanks are consuming enormous quantities of gasoline. Every detour costs fuel. Every hour of waiting costs fuel. Every firefight costs fuel. Then Peiper receives an opportunity that could keep his spearhead moving: Bulge. American forces have established a major fuel supply point there, and the German armored column attacks. The defenders are overwhelmed, and approximately 50,000 gallons of American gasoline fall into German hands. American prisoners are compelled to help refuel the German vehicles. For the Germans, this is more than captured equipment. It is mobility. The gasoline goes directly into tanks and trucks that might otherwise have been forced to stop. Peiper can now continue west, but the Americans are beginning to react. The German column has entered an area where American units are confused and withdrawing, yet resistance is already forming. At approximately 0930, German reconnaissance elements sent north encounter American tank destroyers. The Germans lose 2 Panzer IVs, and the encounter reveals something dangerous. The Americans are no longer simply retreating. They are beginning to organize. Peiper keeps moving, but the roads around Thiermont are slowing the advance. The column is forced onto difficult routes, and every delay becomes more serious. Fuel is not simply something sitting inside a tank. It must be transported, distributed, and replenished. Every mile Peiper travels away from his supply network makes that process harder. By midday, the German column reaches Bognes near Malmedy, where American artillery observers from Battery B of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion encounter the advancing German armor. The Americans surrender after a brief fight, but what follows becomes one of the most infamous atrocities of the Battle of the Bulge. American prisoners are gathered in a field near the crossroads, and German troops open fire, killing dozens of them. At least 84 American prisoners are murdered in what becomes known as the Malmedy Massacre. The killings spread shock and fury through American formations, but Peiper continues west. His objective remains the Meuse, and his greatest enemy remains the same: distance. The German spearhead reaches Stavelot, where the Americans begin turning the terrain itself into a weapon. Engineers destroy bridges that Peiper needs to keep moving. The German tanks can fight their way through American positions, but they cannot drive across a bridge that no longer exists. Peiper's route begins narrowing. The Americans are no longer simply reacting to the German advance. They are buying time, and time is exactly what the German offensive cannot afford. By December 19th and 20th, Peiper's force is increasingly isolated as American resistance hardens around Stoumont and the surrounding roads. German tanks consume more of the fuel captured at Bulge, while every failed crossing and every American counterattack burns through even more gasoline and ammunition. The irony becomes unavoidable. The American fuel that allowed Peiper to continue his advance is also carrying him deeper into a trap. Every tank moving forward increases the distance from German supply. Every destroyed bridge removes another route. Every firefight consumes ammunition and fuel. The 50,000 gallons that once looked like salvation are disappearing, and there is no reliable replacement coming behind them. Peiper's force eventually reaches La Glise, but the mission has changed completely. Instead of racing toward the Meuse, the German battle group is fighting simply to survive. American forces surround the position. German tanks sit immobilized. Some vehicles lack ammunition. Others are running dangerously low on fuel. On December 22nd, Peiper's position is effectively trapped. The Germans still have tanks. They still have soldiers. But they no longer possess the logistical freedom required to use them as a breakthrough force. The road west is closed. Bridges are gone. American forces are tightening the perimeter. And the fuel captured at Bulge is no longer enough. The armored spearhead that was supposed to carry Hitler's offensive deep into the Allied rear has become a stranded force of steel, trapped far from its own supply lines. On December 24th, Peiper gives the order to abandon the remaining vehicles. His men withdraw on foot through the Ardennes, leaving behind dozens of armored vehicles. The breakthrough has failed. The captured American gasoline had bought Peiper time, but it could not buy Germany what the offensive needed most: a sustainable supply line. The collapse of Kampfgruppe Peiper at La Glise reveals the central weakness of the Ardennes offensive. Germany had created a powerful armored spearhead, but a spearhead cannot fight without a supply system behind it. Peiper's force had captured approximately 50,000 gallons of American gasoline at Bulge, and for a brief moment, that fuel transformed a desperate advance into a renewed armored thrust. But the advantage was temporary. The farther the Germans moved, the farther they traveled from dependable German supplies. The captured fuel could keep the tanks moving, but it could not create a permanent supply line. Meanwhile, the Americans continued bringing forward fuel, ammunition, engineers, artillery, and replacement forces. Every German advance encountered another obstacle. When German engineers needed bridges, American engineers destroyed them. When German tanks began running low on fuel, American formations continued to move and reinforce their positions. When Peiper's route narrowed, American resistance became stronger. By December 24th, the situation had become impossible. Peiper's surviving troops abandoned their vehicles at logistical and withdrew on foot. The German spearhead had penetrated deep into Allied territory, but it had failed to reach the Meuse, and the larger Ardennes offensive had failed to achieve its strategic objectives. Joachim Peiper survived the war, but he did not escape the consequences of his command. Captured in May 1945, he was later tried for his role in the Malmedy massacre. He was sentenced to death, although the sentence was eventually commuted, and he was released from prison in 1956. The massacre remained permanently connected to the history of his unit and became one of the darkest episodes associated with the Battle of the Bulge. Peiper later moved to France and lived under an assumed name, but in July 1976, his home in Treves was attacked and set on fire. Peiper was killed, and the identity of those responsible was never established. Today, the roads around Bulge, Stavelot, and logistical remain reminders of Germany's final major offensive in the West. Museums, preserved armored vehicles, wartime photographs, and historical records help reveal what those German columns looked like as they pushed through the Ardennes, and how completely their success depended upon fuel. The story of those 50,000 gallons, therefore, means more than a captured American supply dump. It represents the central paradox of the Battle of the Bulge. Germany could still launch a terrifying armored attack, surprise the Allies, and capture enormous quantities of enemy equipment, but it could no longer sustain the logistics required to turn those victories into a strategic triumph. The Germans could capture American gasoline. They could capture roads. They could capture equipment and prisoners. But they could not capture time. Every hour that passed allowed American reinforcements to arrive, bridges to be demolished, defensive lines to strengthen, and supplies to continue flowing toward the battlefield. The German offensive was therefore fighting against more than American soldiers. It was fighting against an industrial system that could replace what the German army was constantly consuming. Peiper's tanks could move only as long as the fuel lasted, and once that fuel disappeared, the armored spearhead became trapped deep inside enemy territory. That is why the story of Bulge matters. The 50,000 gallons of captured American fuel gave Germany exactly what it needed for a few more days, but not what it needed to win the war. In the Ardennes, the German army still had courage, armor, and tactical aggression. What it no longer possessed was the logistical strength to sustain them. And that became the final lesson of Peiper's advance. Germany could still create a spearhead, but it could no longer keep the spearhead supplied. If you enjoy deeply researched World War II history told through the decisions, struggles, and consequences of the men who lived it, subscribe to the channel and join us for the next story.